Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting details for the week ahead from August 18th to 22nd, 2025. First, Drew Kane had always been a man of deep convictions, but those convictions seemed to be clouded by an ever-growing sense of manipulation and control. In his quest for power, he revealed himself to be a far more dangerous figure than anyone had anticipated. His influence on the lives of those around him was no longer subtle, it was sharp, calculated, and insidious. As the weeks progressed, Drew's actions began to show his true colors. His manipulative nature, once hidden beneath a facade of concern, now emerged fully, setting the stage for a deepening conflict with Michael. Drew's primary target was Michael, and he had been playing the long game, meticulously setting up a series of moves that would force Michael into a corner. Drew's strategy was far from straightforward. It involved coercion and pressure, using his knowledge of Michael's vulnerabilities to push him into compromising situations. The emotional toll it was taking on Michael was clear, but Drew didn't seem to care. Every step Drew took seemed designed to chip away at Michael's resolve, to test the limits of his patience and moral compass. Drew wasn't just targeting Michael, he was targeting everything Michael held dear, his children, his values, his family. One of Drew's most devious tactics involved Willow. He knew how much Michael cherished his family, and he saw an opportunity to exploit this. By subtly pressuring Michael, Drew aimed to force him into allowing Willow to see her children, a situation fraught with emotional and legal complexities. But Drew wasn't counting on one thing: Michael's fierce love for his children and his relentless drive to protect them from anything or anyone who might hurt them. Despite Drew's attempts to manipulate him, Michael remained steadfast, unwilling to bend to Drew's will. Yet, Drew's cunning and relentless nature meant that the pressure would only continue to escalate, making it harder for Michael to maintain control over the situation. While Drew's maneuvers were calculated and manipulative, they were not without their consequences. The tension between Michael and Drew created an undercurrent of unease that threatened to boil over at any moment. Drew's relentless pursuit of control was not just about winning, he was determined to break Michael, to prove that he could outsmart him at every turn. The emotional warfare Drew waged wasn't just about manipulation, it was about domination. And it was clear that Michael, for all his strength, was beginning to feel the weight of it. Amidst this growing turmoil, Willow found herself in an increasingly difficult position. Her relationship with Harrison Chase was becoming a refuge from the storm. What had begun as a tentative connection between the two was now evolving into something far deeper. Harrison, for all his complexities, seemed to offer Willow a sense of stability that she desperately needed. Despite the growing tension in her life, especially with Michael's struggle to deal with Drew, Willow found solace in Harrison's steady presence. But even their bond was not immune to the challenges that surrounded them. Willow's connection with Harrison grew stronger with each passing day, but the reality of the situation was never far from her mind. While their relationship offered moments of respite, there was always the looming question of how long it could last. Drew's machinations had created a toxic environment, and Willow's relationship with Harrison was inevitably being pulled into the web of conflict. Though their love was genuine, it seemed only a matter of time before the external pressures began to take their toll. Could their bond survive the unraveling chaos, or would it become yet another casualty in the battle for control? As the days wore on, it became clear that the stakes were only rising. Michael was under more pressure than ever before, and Drew's grip on the situation was tightening. The manipulations had only just begun, and Drew had no intention of letting up. Each move he made, each word he spoke, seemed designed to wear down Michael's resistance, to push him into a position where he would be forced to compromise. Drew's quest for dominance was all-consuming, and he would stop at nothing to achieve it. Despite all of Drew's efforts, Michael's resolve remained unshaken, at least, on the surface. Beneath the surface, however, cracks were beginning to form. The constant pressure, the emotional toll, and the ever-present threat to his family were taking their toll. Michael was no longer the man he once was, he was now a man driven by the need to protect his children at all costs. But would that drive be enough to withstand Drew's manipulations? Or would Michael find himself at a breaking point, where even his love for his children couldn't shield him from the choices he would have to make? With Drew continuing his underhanded tactics and Michael's resistance being tested, it was clear that the tension between the two men would only intensify. The battle for control over their families, their futures, and their legacies was far from over. And as for Willow and Harrison, their relationship was becoming more intertwined with the chaos surrounding them. How long could they keep their connection intact amidst the mounting pressures? The answers, like the battle between Drew and Michael, remained uncertain, hanging in the balance of every decision made, every step taken. Second, Brooke Lynn Quartermain's life was about to become far more complicated than she could have anticipated, as a series of unexpected emotional entanglements began to emerge. Although she had been focused on her own professional aspirations and familial obligations, the growing connection between Chase and Willow caught her off guard. While she remained mostly unaware of the subtle chemistry developing between them, Brooke Lynn's attention was firmly fixed on Giovanni Gio Palmieri. Her efforts to get closer to him were becoming more intense, driven by a mix of curiosity and her own unspoken desires. In truth, she wasn't prepared for the emotional toll it would take on her as she navigated the complexities of her growing feelings for Gio, and the turbulence he was about to bring into her life. The situation was far from simple. Brooke Lynn had her own battles to fight, and now, with the undeniable pull she felt towards Gio, she was becoming more invested in him. However, she wasn't the only one trying to influence his heart. Dante Falconeri, who had been a longtime ally and friend to Brooke Lynn, found himself drawn into the situation in a more personal way. While he was typically level-headed and focused on his duties, he couldn't help but feel compelled to assist Brooke Lynn in her mission to break down the walls around Joe's heart. The collaboration between Dante and Brooke Lynn was a delicate dance, one fueled by both personal connections and mutual desire for a shared outcome. Together, they hoped to push Gio into revealing the part of himself he had been keeping hidden, hoping that even the smallest crack in his emotional armor might offer a glimpse of something more. While Brooke Lynn and Dante were focused on Gio, Lulu Spencer was about to find herself deeply entangled in an entirely different situation. The decision to adopt Outback, the rambunctious dog who had captured her heart, would come to haunt her in unexpected ways. Initially, Lulu was filled with the hope of giving the dog a better life, but she quickly realized that Outback was no ordinary pet. Outback's high energy and stubborn nature made him more trouble than Lulu had anticipated, creating chaos in her once peaceful home. As Outback began to act out, tearing through her life and home in ways she hadn't foreseen, Lulu began to question her decision. Was she truly prepared for the responsibility of such an unpredictable creature? Or had she underestimated how much her life would change? Despite her best intentions, Lulu found herself struggling to manage Outback's behavior. The idea that she might have bitten off more than she could chew became increasingly clear. She had hoped that her life with her son Rocco would be calm, but the presence of Outback was now making everything far more complicated. While Rocco promised to help her, his attention was pulled in a different direction, as he found himself more interested in his pool activities than in helping with the dog. His youthful distractions meant that Lulu was left to shoulder the burden alone. The frustration and overwhelm Lulu felt were palpable, and as time went on, she began to regret her decision to adopt the feisty dog. In the midst of Lulu's dog-related challenges, Liesel Albrecht had her own issues to contend with, though they were far more personal. Albrecht's obsession with Rocco Falconeri had taken on a new, almost unhealthy dimension. To her, Rocco represented the last link to Britt Westbourne, the daughter she had lost in such tragic circumstances. Rocco was a living connection to Britt, and the pain of losing her was still fresh, no matter how many months had passed. Liesel's fixation on Rocco wasn't just about the boy himself, it was about what he symbolized, a piece of Britt that was still within her reach. For Liesel, this connection was more than just familial, it was almost a form of emotional survival. Without it, she feared she would lose everything she had left of Britt. This overwhelming emotional attachment to Rocco created tension in Liesel's already fragile mental state. Her single-minded determination to keep Rocco close had led her to push the boundaries of her relationships with others. Liesel was not one to back down easily, and once she set her sights on something, she would stop at nothing to achieve her goal. The obsession with keeping Rocco in her life became a consuming force, and her behavior toward him was becoming increasingly possessive. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him, especially as she watched him bond with others, particularly those who had no emotional ties to Britt. Liesel's jealousy began to rise, and the lines between love, protection, and control began to blur dangerously. As Liesel's grip on Rocco tightened, the tensions within the family became undeniable. Brooke Lynn, Dante, and Lulu were all dealing with their own personal struggles, yet none of them could fully comprehend the depth of Liesel's obsession. While Brooke Lynn was navigating her feelings for Gio and Dante was helping her, neither of them realized just how much Liesel's focus on Rocco was slowly poisoning the relationships around them. The emotional stakes were rising, and each character was finding themselves drawn into a web of tension and conflict that they couldn't easily escape. Every interaction, every decision made, was becoming a part of a larger, more complicated narrative that threatened to unravel at any moment. The interplay between these characters was becoming increasingly strained, as they all tried to deal with their own issues while simultaneously dealing with the fallout from others. The relationships between Brooke Lynn, Dante, Gio, and Willow were shifting in subtle ways, with each interaction causing ripples that affected everyone involved. While they each tried to move forward in their own personal lives, they found that their paths were becoming inextricably linked in ways they hadn't anticipated. The unexpected complications with Outback were only adding to the sense of chaos, leaving Lulu to navigate the emotional turmoil of her life while trying to keep everything together. Ultimately, the pressure was mounting for everyone. While some characters were focused on emotional connections and new relationships, others were trapped in the grips of obsessive attachments that were threatening to destabilize their world. Liesel's focus on Rocco was only one example of how unresolved grief and emotional turmoil could influence every decision, no matter how innocent the intention might be. With each character trying to wrestle with their own personal challenges, it was clear that the storm of emotions was far from over. How each of them navigated the difficult terrain ahead would determine the future of their relationships and their peace of mind. Finally, Britt had always been a woman of secrets, but her ability to keep those secrets was starting to unravel in the most unexpected of places. The sudden meeting with Jason at Five Poppies Resort was like a ticking time bomb for her. For months, she had been living under the radar, quietly moving through her life, avoiding the questions she knew would eventually come. But now, standing face to face with Jason, Britt realized she could no longer hide. The questions he would ask were not just inevitable, they were now unavoidable. The faked death, her mysterious disappearance, everything was coming to the surface, and Jason wasn't going to let her walk away with evasive answers. Jason's sharp gaze was impossible to ignore. He had always been the type to cut through the noise, focusing only on the truth. As he pressed Britt for answers, she could feel herself buckling under the weight of his scrutiny. It wasn't just about the death she had faked. It wasn't just about the lies. Jason was digging into the real reason why she had stayed hidden all this time. What had truly kept Britt away from her family, from everyone who loved her? What was her true purpose in staying at that remote location, and who was she protecting? These questions swirled in her mind, and despite her best attempts to remain calm, the pressure was starting to show. Britt wasn't ready to tell the whole truth, not yet. The delicate threads of her life were already unraveling. If she gave Jason all the answers he demanded, everything she had built could come crashing down. The truth about her involvement in the experimental drug program, her knowledge of the Huntington's disease treatment, these were facts that had to be carefully guarded. Yes, Britt had discovered something incredible, a treatment that could change the course of a deadly disease, but the method she had used to find it, the people involved, and the compromises she had made were things she couldn't just share without risking everything. Yet, no matter how much she deflected, she knew Jason wasn't going to let it go. His persistence was like a pressure cooker, pushing her to the point where the truth could no longer stay buried. In the midst of all this, Jocelyn Jacks was dealing with her own set of problems. Her loyalty to her family and her desire to protect Vaughn had always been her driving force. But now, Jocelyn was facing a difficult moral dilemma. Jack Brennan had given her a clear directive: to stay out of certain matters, to avoid stepping into areas where she might get hurt. But Jocelyn had never been one to follow orders, especially when it came to people she cared about. She wasn't about to let someone else make decisions for her, especially not when it involved Vaughn. There was a fire in her that refused to be extinguished, and it was leading her down a dangerous path. Jocelyn's decision to defy Jack was fueled by the growing belief that Britt held information that could be crucial to Vaughn's survival. She didn't know how, but she was convinced that Britt knew something that could save Vaughn. Jocelyn was determined to find out what it was, no matter the cost. It was a risk, but one she was willing to take. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders, and while the stakes were high, she couldn't bring herself to back down. Her resolve was only strengthened by her growing affection for Vaughn, and she knew that whatever it took, she would do whatever she could to protect him. As Jocelyn moved forward with her plan, she realized the danger she was putting herself in. Jason's suspicions were mounting, and her actions could expose more than just Britt's secrets. If she wasn't careful, she could lose her own cover. The last thing Jocelyn needed was for Jason to discover her involvement with the WSB. She had worked hard to keep that part of her life hidden, but now, it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. If Jason found out, it could change everything. She had to tread carefully, but every instinct inside her told her that the risks were worth it. Jocelyn wasn't just looking for answers, she was trying to protect Vaughn from the danger that loomed over him. She had learned that he was in a perilous situation, one that could cost him his life if she didn't act quickly. Her desire to save him became all-consuming, and even though Vaughn had his own doubts about her reckless behavior, Jocelyn remained undeterred. She knew what she had to do, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Vaughn himself, stop her. He might not understand, but in Jocelyn's mind, the mission was clear: save Vaughn, no matter the cost. Vaughn, despite his reservations, couldn't completely ignore Jocelyn's unwavering determination. He respected her, and in a strange way, he admired her courage. But he also knew that this path she was walking was dangerous. The more Jocelyn pushed, the more likely it was that she would expose herself, and perhaps even ruin her future in the process. Vaughn had always been a man of reason, someone who calculated risks before jumping in. But Jocelyn was different. She acted on instinct, and right now, her instincts were leading her into an impossible situation. As the tension mounted, Jocelyn knew that there was no turning back. She had already committed herself to finding the answers, to forcing Britt to reveal what she knew. But the cost of her actions was becoming clearer by the minute. If she succeeded, she could help Vaughn, but if she failed, she could lose everything. Her relationship with Jack would be forever damaged, her connection to her family threatened, and her involvement in the WSB exposed. The pressure was unlike anything Jocelyn had ever faced before. Each decision now seemed like a ticking clock, counting down to an inevitable confrontation that she might not be prepared for. Meanwhile, Jack Brennan's reaction to Jocelyn's betrayal was building to a dangerous crescendo. He had always been protective of her, but his patience was wearing thin. The rules he had set were clear, and Jocelyn had disregarded them. His anger was palpable, and when he discovered what she had done, there would be no turning back. Jack's fury was legendary, and the consequences of crossing him were not something Jocelyn could easily escape. She had made her bed, and now, she would have to lie in it. The fallout from her actions would be severe, and the personal and professional consequences could be devastating. Jocelyn's determination to save Vaughn had driven her into a dangerous game, one where every move she made could lead to disaster. But for now, she couldn't think about the consequences. All she could focus on was getting the information she needed from Britt and ensuring Vaughn's safety. As the walls closed in on her, she realized that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The stakes had never been higher, and in the end, it would take every ounce of strength and courage she had to navigate the consequences of the decisions she had made. The drama at General Hospital was far from over. The lives of Jocelyn, Britt, and the people they loved were all in turmoil, each facing their own personal battles and challenges. But in the end, it would be the choices they made now that would determine their futures. How far would Jocelyn go to protect Vaughn? How much longer could Britt keep her secrets hidden? And when Jason's questions finally cut through all the lies, who would be left standing? Only time would tell, and the consequences of these actions were bound.